Welcome to the SwineTime podcast here at PIPESTONE. I'm your host, Spencer Wayne. I'm one of the staff veterinarians here at PIPESTONE, and they let me do this fun job a couple times a month. I get to record a podcast with interesting people. Sometimes they're not from within our organization. Most of the time they are within the organization, and they're people that have skills that have valuable things to share. And so today I got some guests that I'm really excited about. Nick Enfield and Jeff Blythe. Jeff is also one of our veterinarians. Nick is a production person, and I'll turn it over to them, and they can just briefly describe who they are, how long they've been with the company, what they do, so you kind of get a little bit of background. And then we're going to get into the topic of ventilation challenges. And both of these guys have thoughts that are, I think, worth sharing on challenges and pitfalls and things that might go wrong, both on the health side and the mechanical setup side. So I'll start with Jeff. Why don't you introduce yourself and say who you are, and we'll go over to Nick after that.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. Jeff Blythe, grew up in southeast Iowa, practiced in northwest Iowa and South Dakota the last 33, 34 years. So been with the company since 2018 and do a lot of grow finish work on downstream flows from many of our sow farms as well as individual producer sow farms.
Okay. Nick, tell us about yourself.
So I've been with Pipestone about 7 years and grew up in central Iowa and still live there. Work with a bunch of our customers on all their downstream, wean to market, feeder to market production. And I'm a production consultant with the Farm Pro team that I get to go out and work with our awesome clients.
Okay, Farm Pro is one of our internal programs, a service offering here to work with grow finish. Right?
Absolutely. So our team is about 14 people from southeast Minnesota, while really covering South Dakota all the way down to, at one point I was going down to Missouri, central Missouri. So cover a pretty wide geography.
I noticed your accent picks up. You got a little Missouri in your accent.
Well, don't tell too many people that.
All right. So I got to talk to Nick. Really, I didn't know you. I'd known Jeff for a while, but didn't know you until yesterday. We were speaking. I was kind of getting set up for this talk, and then I realized you were super passionate about ventilation. And then I realized, man, you could talk about it for hours. Yep. And so I'm gonna address the elephant in the room right now. It's like, Nick, if you start talking too much, we're gonna shut you down. And also, I know Jeff, and Jeff is also passionate, so it might be me telling both of you to shut up every once in a while. But a lot of knowledge, a lot of things that are valuable and worth sharing. So we'll hit that. And also, you guys are both Iowans, so I will talk slowly. Is it? No.
All right.
But yeah, Jeff, you'd be my go-to guy for a lot of things ventilation and health related. And then Nick, now that I know you better, I might be calling you.
Okay.
So let's start it out. Ventilation, some of the challenges, and Nick, I know you've kind of crystallized your thoughts on things to look out for. So why don't you take us through challenge one?
Yeah. So for me, as we think about kind of the basics of ventilation, before we talk about the nuances of CFMs or even a recommended temperature curve, a set point, functionality is paramount. So it doesn't matter how we set it up, if fans aren't functioning, things like that. Probes are incredibly important because temperature drives how that barn stages up and stages down. So a couple of things, we see fairly often. Probe placement is incredibly important. You don't want those probes in front of heaters, in front of inlets. It really leaves you pretty limited in where you can place those probes in a barn, but having those in the right spot can really drive the temperature in the barn and how those pigs are performing in the facility. So a couple other things I wanted to bring up that are, I think overlooked at times is fan performance. So, like we talked about, like on a tunnel fan specifically, those molded plastic cones are meant to create a vortex. And so I was actually having a conversation with somebody at AP last week, and those tunnel fans can lose, approximately about 15% of their performance. So, those things break over time. They get brittle. Snow load, somebody backs into it with a tractor. So
those are two good points. Go back to the probe placement.
Yep.
Because I was also talking to Jeff about the reality that in a room without a lot of air moving in it will stratify a lot. Hot top, cold bottom, but it actually inverts, Jeff was saying. So, trying to ventilate for the pig at the level of the pig, and where do you put those probes? Jeff, talk a little bit about air stratification, what you found. You were sharing some things I really wasn't aware of. And then I want to ask about how should you place the probe? But Jeff, share what you were sharing with me earlier.
So, with the new tools we have over the more recent years, as opposed to when I first came out as a veterinarian in the early 90s, two tools that I carry with me quite often into barns would be one, an anemometer, of course, to check airspeed.
Like a red kestrel?
Yeah, a red kestrel anemometer. They're not very expensive. I think for anybody that's doing any serious number of pigs that they're watching over should have an anemometer. And I also have what's called a Raytech gun or a Raytech Ranger.
Infrared gun, like a
infrared gun. Yeah. And so what I've found in my career, I've got a few pet peeves in veterinary medicine and production medicine, and one of them is cold pigs,
okay,
right? Or and those kind of things, especially early on in the nursery, early on in the finisher. We're getting into fall. We're going to pump the pits. We're going to create a lot more air, cooler air underneath the pig that's going to be pulling past that pig, or that pig is exposed to. So to your point, Spencer, about the stratification, what we typically see, and whether you're going into a nursery or a wean to finish barn, and at the certain square footage, we've got way more square footage per pig than we need early on, right? And at some point in that, either that nursery or in that finisher, most of our probes are set at roughly 5 feet off the ground, we'll say, right? Just keep them away from the pigs, things like that. And what I found when you temp what the probe is at, and the probe is reading that, you're reading our set point, and what the pig is feeling down low, it's certainly cooler than the probe early because hot air rises, right? But as you get enough pig density within that pen, and now we're approaching a certain amount of pig density, it actually inverts. So the pig is feeling a warmer temperature in his microenvironment down there than what the probe is reading 5 degrees off or 5 feet off the ground.
Yeah, so that it shifts. It goes
Absolutely.
The opposite. So in my mind, it's like, well, we should have the temp being read where the pig is at any given moment, early or late.
Right.
But then how do you do that?
Well, you can with PVC tubing and stuff, but I think it's still, I think you just be aware and leave them where they are, and just be aware, okay, back to our point, the pig is always right. Kind of like the customer is always right, the pig is always right. The pig's going to tell you what's going on. And I still like the 5 feet off the ground if you want to get to that nitty gritty of bringing the probe down there, but you got dirty, it's a little dirty that can get plugged up in that PVC tubing and things like that. So,
and then they eat it.
Or they eat it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so be mindful. But I've seen people that take a PVC tube and they've got holes drilled in it and try to get air, but you're always kind of not allowing the probe to fully feel the room when you guard it like that.
True.
Okay, so there's that. You mentioned not being in front of heaters, and I've definitely seen that. Overrides for when people wash, flipping them all the way up where you're trying to ventilate a minimum, but your 36-inch fan keeps running the entire time is another one. That's dumb. That's a dumb mistake. But what else for probe placement for? Yeah,
and I don't want to, on those heaters, they come with deflectors. So some guys have them on, some guys have them off. I whether you run them with or without doesn't really matter. You just don't want the heater blowing on that probe. Yep. It can throw off your actual room temperature pretty far if your probe's getting blown on by the heater, vice versa by inlets, and so by the inlets. And I was in a tunnel barn one time. Bill Steenster actually called me there. He's struggling to figure out what was going on. And
Bill struggles a lot, though.
He does struggle a lot. And but we were walking through there and trying to figure out. The controller was saying it was X temp in there. We could feel. This was before we had our anemometer in our pocket, and we could feel it was significantly warmer in there. And so we just started walking through, and here we found the temperature probes were placed directly between inlets. So it was taking air out of those inlets. So it was feeling a lot cooler than the actual barn temperature was. So
what about, I've seen it where you take the old Mountain Dew bottle, you slide it over, you tape it, so it's a little bit of a shield for direct contact. Is that effective? I think it probably must help a little.
I think it depends on the situation. I have seen that more often. Actually, the first time I saw it was in a nursery, and I think the building's smaller, so it just compresses your options of where you can place those probes. So it might be offset to the inlet just a little bit, but it's still catching some air. And I think those types of situations,
dampen it a little bit.
Yep.
Okay, so probe placement. We could beat that horse to death for a long time, but okay, probe placement. Make sure the pig is you're guiding your decisions on ventilation to where the pig is feeling it, and even if it's just knowing that it's going to be different, early versus late, and doing that, and then watching the pig all the time. The pig is always right, so the pig's piled up, and you're thinking, "Dang it, pigs! It's warm enough for you." Yet they're piled up 3 deep. It's not warm enough for them. Cones. You lose how much ventilation capacity or efficiency if you don't have the cones, and that's the outside cone. That's
So on a tunnel fan, we're talking about a 15% reduction in efficiency. On those pit fans, we actually figure about 10% for dirt and manure. I mean, inherently, pit fans will get dirty, and about another 10% for what I would call wind resistance. So whether it's got shutters in there, or the wind deflector hat, or even prevailing winds. So we really take those fans, their book value times 90% twice to get at what I would call an actualized CFM value.
Okay. Yeah. And the reason those cones that sit outside the barn on the fan and they allow, you used to call it vortexing, but essentially the air is going out, and because it's going out in more of a shaft of air versus just dispersing, that allows it to be more efficient as it pulls air out of the barn. Mm-hmm. So you lose some, if you don't have the cones on, you lose that. Absolutely. And they'll crack over time, you said.
Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned that. Now what next?
Once we've got really a functional facility, fans, all that, we're going to talk about setting it up and what's the right setup. So math, we want to use math to kind of guide our decisions, or at least put us in the right spot. And we talk about a wean pig. We're going to talk about a minimum of a 2 CFM on those wean pigs. So when we talk about, we'll just do easy math here. 1,000 head room, 2 CFM, you're looking for 2,000 CFMs, right? And so we need to understand, the size of your fan, whether you got an 18-inch pit fan, a 24-inch pit fan, to really kind of set our base level of ventilation. And kind of what Jeff was saying, from there, that gets us to the right ballpark, and we're going to use our senses. How are the pigs laying? Is it humid? Or is it gassy? How do the pigs look? Let them guide our decisions in terms of how do we tweak it from there? Do we need to up our minimum vent a little bit? Do we need to lower it? What's our heater run times? Kind of taking in all that information to guide our decision making.
So let's complete the easy math on that. 1,000 head room, 2 CFM, 2,000 CFM is what I want, and you have an 18-inch fan. What's an 18-inch fan give? Full power.
Oh, well, we deal with a lot more 24s on the pits, so I got those memorized. Yeah, the 24 we give about a 5,000 CFM value.
So that should be running like 40%. One fan at 40% would give you 2,000 CFM. Approximately, yeah. The actual math. There's some conversion tables. A 24-inch pit fan at 50% on the controller is about 1,950 CFM. Okay. Yep. All right. And then you have other things. If you go below a certain percent running, 40%, it becomes unreliable against wind, and so it's
hard on the motors.
You may unplug. If you got 2 fans, you may unplug one just to run the remaining one at a higher percentage.
Right. It's more efficient. Yep.
Okay. So. Baseline CFM per pig at wean is a good topic, because then I go there and think, all right, well, what happens if it's not right? Let's go with less. Let's say you're ventilating at half a CFM per pig, and I'm just imagining you walk in, it feels wet. Jeff, what's the problem with a wet barn at placement if you have underventilation happening because your CFM is too low?
Well, bacteria and viruses love a warm, humid environment. Well, as long as it's not too warm, right? So, higher humidity creates a great environment for the pathogens to grow and propagate and negatively impact that pig, right? And so just like, it's over my 30-year career, it's been phenomenal, the advances in ventilation and the quality of the barns. I mean, I grew up in kind of some modified open fronts and some chimney barns, and they would be very, very wet, water dripping on you in the winter, in the coldest days, and you came out smelling very strongly out of those barns. Mm-hmm. Now in the new engineered barns that we have, we can ventilate, before, for example, a curtain finishing barn, we can get to 45, 50 CFMs even sometimes before that curtain needs to run. And you're going to smell like a pig, but it's a good indicator that we're keeping the humidity out of the barn. We want to shoot for somewhere between 40 and 60, probably around 50% humidity is a good target for most days, and that's good to keep. It helps keeps the slats dry, the pig's microenvironment dry.
Where would you get worried if you have a humidity probe? The Kestrel that I use has got wind speed, humidity, temperature. If you go in there and say, I was reading 78, get worried. Where would you say, hey, we got to dry this thing down, because whether it's because of diarrhea on the slats causing it or under ventilation, there's just too much moisture in the room. Where's the action point where you got to change something?
I definitely want to be intervening if it's getting towards 70, or above 70. 80's worse, obviously, but really try to drive towards the 50% range, give or take.
All right. Okay. What's the highest you've ever seen in a barn, if you're measuring it?
80s, upper 80s.
Yeah. I've seen it 90 before, where it feels like it is almost literally raining on you.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then the question for Jeff is, it's high. What would you see? What's the outcome of that? I got a problem, and the problem is what? From being too humid? That you would actually see and diagnose or say, this is the problem we're dealing with because of this ventilation?
There's a few things. I think when it's really humid, and depending on the environment, the temperature of the room, you can actually make the pigs, slightly damp. And so
they feel wet because they're wet. The air's wet. But what health thing happens, I guess, is what I'm getting.
Sure.
At.
Well, so it's again, as I mentioned, a better environment for the gut bugs to grow, right? The E. coli's, the viral things like that. It's also a difficult environment to breathe. And so respiratory is a possibility. The bacteria as I mentioned, love a warm, humid environment. That's why strep lives on the tonsils.
Would you see more strep or Haemophilus or those type things in a really damp room?
Absolutely. Back early in my career, as I mentioned, I mean, that was the driver in those modified open front, the Cargill type barns, or the partial slatted barns with the chimney style. We'd see APP.
Oh, really? From ventilation causing.
Yeah. Okay. In
little pigs or bigger pigs?
Bigger pigs. This would be downstream
definitely
back when APP was a bigger problem and before we started eradicating that from the swine herds and things like that. So we'd see, back in those days it was called HPS, Haemophilus parasuis. Now it's Glasserella, Asuis, APP in a humid environment. Definitely would see that pop.
Okay.
In those time frames. Generally the winter months, barns closed up, things like that.
Okay, so that's too low. And you said 2 CFM per pig weaned in. And the rule of thumb I got in my head is whatever the pig weight is divided by 10, or 1 CFM per that. So 30-pound pig, 3 CFM. It kind of like that. It basically goes along. A 50-pound pig, 5 CFM per pig minimum. Is that what you would figure for minimum? Something close to that?
That's really close, especially in, I would call it a cold weather scenario. Obviously, as weather warms, those get accelerated.
Okay. So on that, if you got any commentary on too much, I got too many fans running. First, what is too much? Is that 5x the baseline, or where would you run into trouble on a wean pig?
Yeah, and to what Jeff was saying, I think that's where the utilizing the tools we have, anemometers are incredibly critical as we, get the barn stage. We want to get the inlets set to the right opening. So if we think about, one fan being on and it's a static number, we're going to adjust the inlets effectively to, we're going to decide how we want to handle the pressure, or control the velocity or the speed of the air coming out of those inlets. So again, it's pretty nuanced. So to your question, it may not be that the temperature's wrong. It's that we're running the speed way too fast. It might be 1,200 feet a minute coming out of the inlets and we're drafting those pigs. Or it's too slow and it's just falling straight down. So it may not be strictly temperature related. It may be that we don't have the right airspeed coming out of those inlets.
Okay. I rarely see overventilation. It's typically underventilating, and we're trying to save propane. All those kind of things around it. But it's when we run our barns too humid. It's bad for the pigs. It's bad for the people working in those barns. And then lastly, it's bad for your barn health, right? Mm-hmm. Where's that humidity going to go? We spend, the new construction is $1 million for a new finisher, right? And where's that humidity going to go if we run that barn too wet? Well, it's going to go into the stud walls. It's going to go in the ventilation. It's going to wear out your barn faster than it needs to go or it needs to be. So I see underventilating more, and I think it's a pay me now, pay me later kind of a thing. Certainly overventilation. The pigs get confused. They don't know where's my bedroom area, where's my bathroom area, those kind of things. So you get messy pigs. You get pigs that just aren't going to perform health-wise and then production-wise. I think we have the ability with modern facilities today to keep that pig in their thermal neutral zone 330 days a year, roughly.
Just the hottest days of summer, you're out.
You're out. It. The rest of the time, you should be able to keep them in their thermal neutral zone. And feed efficiency in these genetics that we're feeding today is locked in. So how do we get that pig to market faster? How do we make that pig the most profitable is through feed intake and daily gain.
And you're going right where we should cover a little bit is set point. You got a curve. When they're little, it's higher. When they're older, it's lower. And you could get an exact curve, but it's going to be watching the pig. But in general, cooler makes them eat more because they feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Where this comes up a lot. I can't set it that low because my pigs will get sick. So where do you see people running set points in the heart of finishing? Let's say mid-finishing onward. Where would you want that set? Where do you feel comfortable setting the set point, and why? And what's the pig actually feel?
Well, I mean, certainly you have to know your flow of pigs and what is the health, what are the challenges that you're dealing with, the types of barn. For the customers I work with, we are fortunate to have very healthy flow. We're taking those set points to 60 degrees and sometimes even 58 degrees by 70 days into the finisher.
Okay, no health challenges. You can pull them down quite a bit,
Absolutely.
Knowing that they're probably not spending any time actually at 60 degrees, but you're trying to get close. In the summertime, you can pull them down because you're trying to get closer to that.
And then,
is that right?
Yes, and like I shared earlier with you, Spencer, back to our earlier point, if our set point's at 60 degrees and you got 220-pound pigs in that pen at 7.5 square feet, 7.4, 7.5, somewhere in there, it's actually probably 6 to 8 degrees hotter down in that pen, in that microenvironment, what that pig's feeling. So he's really only feeling 68, right? Well, 68 is pretty comfortable for us. I mean, that's pretty comfortable for us to live and eat and work. Where do you see him running down, Nick?
Yeah, I have a hard time convincing a lot of guys to go that low. I totally am on board with that. Typically what we see is in that 62, 64 range for the lowest we go. The biggest thing too on that is like those curtain barns. It'll really dictate, especially spring and fall, how fast we're getting that curtain open, which can make a big difference.
Okay. And that leads to the next thing, just summer versus winter, how aggressive you want your stage advancement. So first stage, second stage, third stage, spread those bandwidths out, tighten them up. How do you look at that seasonality wise? I'll start with Nick on this. How do you do it?
Again, a ton of nuances to that, and then it varies based on the pig you're getting. Generally speaking, what I like to do is in call it cold weather, be 2 degrees from stage to stage. In the summertime, or as those pigs get bigger, I will shrink that down to 1.5. Again, there's some nuances there, spring and fall, size of pig. We may just run 2 degrees for the first couple stages and then go to 1.5. So there's some nuances there again.
But more aggressive when it's hot.
Absolutely.
You say, hey, I just got to get to that temperature quicker so that I'm not letting that pig spend time at a higher temp.
Yeah, and I would say on that point, Spencer, is, if we think about the total number of stages and the total number of degrees, when we get 10, 11, 12 degrees above set point, we need to be probably in full tunnel at that point. So when I'm talking tunnel barn, obviously, when you start going to these barns and evaluating how ventilation is set up, I've ran into some situations where the controllers are so advanced and we have so much fan power, which is good. We've set up 12 stages of ventilation, which ends up putting full tunnel, 14.5, 15 degrees from set point. I think, we get in those situations. I have not found a barn yet that we've needed to go over 8 total stages. So we get to that 10, 11, 12 degrees above set point. Your last couple stages can be double fans.
Well, whether it's a lot of stages or not, what's what do you generally have for a top to bottom setting in a tunnel barn, fully power ventilated, no curtains, from set point to last stage kicking on? How many degrees would you normally have that?
It's about 12.
12 degrees?
Yep. It's going to vary a little bit depending on whether you're at 2 degrees or 1 degree or 1.5 degrees between your stages.
Yeah.
Okay. I usually run it a little bit tighter than that. I didn't know if there was a danger of having it to be too narrow from top to bottom.
There is. I mean, less at the top end of that ventilation, more risk at the bottom end. What I mean by that is, like, when you're in stage 2, and if you have them at 1 degree, you got to think about, you're going to get through your stages faster as you go up and it warms. It's going to come down through those stages a lot faster. So the risk there is you get below set point, and again, your probes are reactionary to what the temperature is. So if you drop it too fast and you're in that temperature is coming down really fast, you get below set point. What you don't want to do is run into your heaters and you create this yo-yo. So. Right.
One final topic, and I see we're hitting on some minutes here. We're already 25 minutes in. I'm getting the evil eye from Katie. Vices constantly come up as an issue, especially like in breeding stock barrows or gilts. They seem to be more sensitive, but not only them, but tails, side sores, side biting, ear tip necrosis and biting. These vices seem to come up, and is the diet right? Am I doing these other things right? But ventilation is constantly thrown out as something that's not right that causes it, and I think rightly so. But what would be the basic setup to cause that? What ventilation causes ear necrosis, tail biting, and side sore biting? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think we go back to our common mistake would be underventilating a barn. And we're trying to preserve propane and those kind of things as, new pigs. We're getting into fall. We're emptying out pits. It's taking more propane to keep that barn warm. I think those vices, the humidity, the skin is moist. It's a little more fragile probably. So underventilating the barn. And I see it, Spencer, those two things, probably underventilating, and then secondly, looking at the diet. I mean, are we getting through that stage? Do we need a little more lysine in that diet, that stage where can we confirm that it's happening at that certain point in time of that flow of pigs consistently? If it is, then we need to look at diet. If it isn't, then I think we need to look at their environment.
Okay, and what I heard from you was underventilation. So too moist, too much moisture in the air, something leading to bacteria growing in these spots, and there's fragile, sensitive spots, and then you see the ears go. The
pigs are uncomfortable. They're irritated. They're not happy that their buddy's that close to them. Okay. All those kind of things.
All right. You ever see where it's overventilation is the cause?
I have, just not as often.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I as a production consultant, I always say 3 things when I start to see vices. It's one of 3 things that's causing that animal to be uncomfortable, and it's potentially a feed issue, it's a water issue, or it's an air issue. It's one of those 3 that's irritating him or making him unhappy. And what I can control, obviously being in the barn that day, I'm going to go verify ventilation, right? I'm going to go through stages, double check everything, use my anemometer, go through that. And then we'll start to dig into other challenges, make some phone calls to peers and figure out if they're seeing the same thing, if it's at the same time. We need to dig into diets. There was a situation where a mill ran out of salt and just stopped putting it in the feed one time. And just, we had to figure that out. Right. And so, those things do happen, but to me, it's those 3 things. One of them is probably making him unhappy. And so the one I can control, I'm in the barn right now at the moment, is I'm going to double check ventilation, and then we'll work through the other 2.
Okay. So to kind of recap everything, watch the pigs first. Always watch the pigs. Should basically use some simple math to baseline yourself on ventilation. I got this many fans running. I got this many pigs of this size. I really want to kind of match that up and then watch the pigs and tweak from there. That's another one. Be mindful of the pigs feeling different temperature than what the probe is feeling. Said that early on. Just be mindful of it. However you can adjust that so you don't get the probes chewed and still get an accurate reflection of the room temp. Fan cones, fans working, those type of things. And then my question about the ear necrosis and the devices, and basically don't get a hot, humid environment to begin with, because that probably initiates some behavior that you don't want, and in the environment to grow the bacteria.
That's right.
Anything else we missed? I know we could talk for hours. We really could.
We just scratch the surface.
We are. Yeah, and so it's fun doing these audits. Like you said, I got to go verify these things. And so you walk in and think, let me look at every stage. I'm just going to do the math at every stage. I'm going to look at the inlet opening at every stage. I'm going to measure the airspeed at every stage just to make sure we're not missing something that when you leave and it gets slightly warmer or colder, all the wheels don't fall off because something funky happens on the controller. Fair to say, you should get good enough to do the math and really be critical of your settings is part of it.
Absolutely.
I really like to walk the barns as early as I can in the day to understand what's going on in that minimum environment, which is happening 10 or 12 hours out of the day, right? Overnight. So,
hey, I keep talking more because we're at 30 minutes already now, but tools that you guys use, you talked about having a radar gun or an infrared gun, the Kestrel, some kind of anemometer. What about those Kestrel drops? The Leveman, you can actually get a graph of humidity and temperature over a 24-hour period. You guys use those too?
Yeah, I have, and like we were talking the other day to the minimum vent, we hung those, and we're actually looking at and analyzing the difference in how we set up relays and the impact it had on temperature and humidity, and it was some pretty interesting data to look at relative to pig size. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I really should wrap it up now because I am way over time. You guys are the people I would go to for questions that I have, and so for our listening audience, thanks for being part of this. I imagine everybody out there that raises pigs encounters these concepts and the questions and what am I doing this right? If you ever want to bounce ideas off, you can, people can call me, people that know me, but you guys are also available internally if people want to call, and you can get hold of Nick Enfield or Jeff Blythe, veterinarian Jeff, and Nick, production person. Both these guys are passionate about health and ventilation and health and ventilation. So
Absolutely.
I know there's a definite cross between those two concepts, health and ventilation. So thank you, guests, for being here. Appreciate it. And thanks to our listeners for being part of this podcast today. The SwineTime podcast was created for the pork industry and individual pork producers around the country. Hosted by me, Dr. Spencer Wayne with Pipestone Veterinary Services, the podcast contains pork industry news, advancements in animal care, and how to enhance your productivity. Find the SwineTime podcast at www.pipestone.com or on your favorite listening platform.